Andres, I have a question for you. In the last panel, we heard we had Lanny Breuer talking about how really companies that are subject to the FCPA, other sorts of international anti-corruption measures, aren't really at a disadvantage versus companies, say, from China or India who are bidding for contracts, say, in the Andean region, which you are very familiar with. Is that what you see? Are they not at a disadvantage?
No, I would oppose that comment. And let's say there are two things here is business people in the region, let's say the guys in the front line selling, they're not thinking of compliance day in, day out. They're thinking of how do we grow the pie, how do we make our numbers, and what it takes to make our numbers. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Talking to this crowd, this is the topic for lawyers, for compliance officers, for the business people. I've seen it when they get people to do e-training, it's their secretaries doing the e-training and repeating the course for 10 executives. So she can pass the course and the guy gets the certificate. So let's say with that said, I feel that most of the business community is not thinking about compliance as we talk about compliance here. But to your question, I do think there's a big disadvantage for U.S. companies, or for companies like the two here who are trying to comply with certain rules and regulations. Because I do feel that Chinese companies, Iranian companies, and the so-called multi-Latinas, the bigger Latin companies who are starting to do business around the region, have a different standard of competition. Carlos Salinas is the richest man in the world.
Yes.
That tells you something. A guy from Mexico who started in the telecommunications industry in a publicly owned company and industry and now is the richest man in the world, tells you a bit how a lot of these players are competing. So people are not going to say it up front, but the reality is that you're in an environment where you call it in Venezuela or some other country as there's certain opportunity in certain industries that you have to be there, you have to play by those rules. So when in the Chavez administration, they send you to talk to a guy in PDVSA in charge of food and agricultural, and the guy sells you that it's a special social tax so he can give to the poor. That's a right. That's a payment you have to make. And it's how are people disclosing it to their corporate operations? And I think Josie touched upon it about the cultural and subcultural aspects. It's, people tend to paint a country with one brush, Brazil, a region with one brush. But even when you're in Bogota and you go to Medellin, it's a different standard it's a different playing game. And I think that's where a lot of compliance officers and even compliance programs are not taking into account. How does the business people think? How does the cultural and subcultural aspects play into your compliance program? And how do you deal, let's say, when you're talking about third parties, as you mentioned, is we tend to have assumptions when you start a compliance program. Absolutely. And the assumptions is everyone has the same objectives, everyone abides by the same ethical guidelines, everyone follows the same rules.
The same judicial system.
Yeah.
It's not civil law. It is
I think that's the biggest challenge is that those assumptions, and it's a bit of a trick, a balancing act, is how much you you make your compliance program flexible enough to capture that information and be more realistic about the risks.
Yeah, if I may, I just wanted to share with you, and Josie and Andres can help me out on this. Brazil is a civil law country, so some of the bias some of the arguments and the fundamentals that a U.S. company would have to build a compliance program would be what I heard yesterday. When you have a red flag and you think that this is going to be something that you will have to report, go directly to third-party law firms, because then you will have confidentiality. It doesn't happen. Yeah. It is not like this. So you see, it is really, really important to capture the difference and the nuances. I mean, we're not a common law. In Brazil, we're not common law. We're a civil law. I mean, just because we are lawyers or just because you are talking to a third-party law firm, this does not give you the confidentiality and the attorney work privilege that you would have here in the US.
So there are other ways to do it. It just doesn't mean
Absolutely.
it's exactly the same way that you would do it otherwise. It's just those
Absolutely.
nuances are important for whoever wants to be really global.